because that was one of the things that I found personally that I wound up with a lot of self-criticism about, where I sat there for so long and I was like, okay, but I'm reading the books, but I'm going for therapy, but I'm moving my body, I'm getting enough sleep, I'm doing all of the things. Why am I still feeling like this?
Welcome, everyone, to the Chill Like a Mother podcast. Today, we are diving into one of my favorite topics. And it's a favorite not because it's fun, it's a favorite because a lot of people tell me in my clinical work and even conversations I've had on social media about mom guilt and burnout and overwhelm. And I'm here with Mariah today, and she's going to share a bit of her experience and some strategies. And we are just going to jump right into the conversation today. So Mariah, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience today?
So my name is Mariah Vargo. I guess, a lot of things. I am a mom of 4 boys. I am an educator. I have spent most of my 11 years, I guess, teaching as a learning support teacher. So I work with kids in schools who have some challenging behavior or academic struggles and support them through that. And I get to work as part of a team in that capacity. And then I have also been a single mom, and I have been a foster parent in the province. And so I feel like all of those different roles that I've played in my both professional and mothering journey have given me a really unique spectrum of things to pull from. I'm also currently working on, or waiting, I guess, to hear if I get accepted into a Master's of Counseling Psychology program.
Can we start out with kind of outlining how you would define burnout for moms?
Oh, I feel like it's tough because it can look different for people, but I do think that there's just that common element of that overwhelm and that feeling of just like, I can't keep doing that, or even like a numbness where it's just, you're just coasting and you're there, but you're not really there. And maybe it's a case of like you reflect back on your day and you're like, I honestly have no flipping clue what the heck I even did today. Like, I don't know where the time went. I know for me personally that overwhelm was a big piece, and it got to the point where I just couldn't cope anymore. And so I've seen that too with a lot of friends and families that I've worked with, where the parents are struggling and they're burnt out, they don't have much more to give, and so there's that emotional component, but then it also presents itself physically too. And that, at least for me personally, I found has been the most profound wake up call, I guess, in my own personal journey and struggle with burnout, was those physical symptoms of the burnout that really started to get to me. So,
yeah. I think that's a really relatable kind of self-imposed definition, or how it presents.
Yeah, it's not
no, for sure.
Like, definition.
And I think there's no. I was just listening to a podcast this morning where they were defining anxiety, and then they were defining trauma, and the definition that they used for trauma was not like a psychological, the definition that would be in a diagnostic manual or used by kind of more of the typical psychologist or therapist. And I found it really interesting that they were just like, and this is what trauma is, or this is what anxiety is. And so I think when we receive definitions or experiences, the way it's held in the body, the way that it presents, I think it's much more relatable, for us to say burnout feels like this, or it sounds like this, like I can't go on, or I can't do one more thing, or I can't take on one more thing. I think that makes it a little bit more relatable in that way. And I just want to, I think, pause and just make a note for anybody who's like listening, who might be in the thick of burnout and feeling really despair or dread, heading into any day, to, if you're listening to this and you feel triggered or activated, or, oh, wow, that must be nice to have access to whatever kind of strategies or resources we might be talking about later, that it's okay to, one, stop listening if it's not serving you, and two, to make sure that you can access some kind of resource that may help you move through burnout. And if you're feeling capable and like you're ready to listen, then I would just encourage you to continue and to be um, listening with a curiosity instead of maybe like a self-criticism. I think when we dive into topics like burnout or guilt or shame or vulnerability, that it can bring up things in our bodies and in our minds around how we're not doing enough, or, oh, it must be nice, she must have different resources than me, I don't have access to that kind of stuff. And so I think it's important when we're thinking about changing any kind of patterns, we just want to acknowledge that there's hard parts for everyone, and that if you're in a particularly really difficult down place, that listening to strategies might not make you feel very good. So I just wanted to kind of outline that for any of the listeners who might not be in a place where they're ready to receive. So,
I actually really appreciate that you said that, because that was one of the things that I found personally that I wound up with a lot of self-criticism about, where I sat there for so long and I was like, okay, but I'm reading the books, but
right.
I'm going for therapy, but I'm moving my body, I'm getting enough sleep, I'm doing all of the things. Why am I still feeling like this? I really appreciate that you said that, because you can, with burnout, be doing
all of the
everything
things.
right.
In fact, you probably are doing all of the things. Yeah.
And you will still be burnt out. Sometimes we're like, okay, but there must be something hugely wrong with me, because I'm doing all these things that it says that you're supposed to do. I'm an educator, and in my job is to work with challenging behavior in schools. And that alone, on its own, is exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes so much from you, because you go in every day and you give your heart and soul to that job, trying to help those kiddos. And sometimes what you're doing doesn't help. So then what was happening was I was sitting there and I was like, hey, I'm a failure. What I'm doing isn't working. Why isn't it working? Because again, every book says this is what you do. Mm-hmm. So why isn't it working? It must be something that's wrong with me. And then I started to internalize that. And then I'd go home and I'd have my own children after spending a day dealing with children with challenging behavior and feeling like what I'm doing isn't working. I'm not making a difference. My job as a teacher, the whole reason I became a teacher, was to make a difference. And I don't feel like I'm doing that. And then I come home and one of my children has some challenging behavior of their own that we've been navigating. And so it was like I'd go from one situation to another one. And that was exhausting. And then with teaching, a lot of the time, it's not just teaching. There's extra cur, there's committees, there's meetings, there's XYZ. And I just kept taking on more and taking on more and taking on more, thinking, well, good teachers do this. Good moms do this. We sign up to coach the soccer team or the ball team or the whatever team. And, oh, sure, we'll work at this fundraiser and that fundraiser and the next fundraiser. And we'll be on this board and that board and the next board. And I knew it was coming. Actually, before even going into the school year, this school year, I knew it was coming. I could feel it in my body. I had tons of physical symptoms. I had vertigo. I was sweating excessively. I was breaking out in rashes everywhere. Like my armpit skin was actually peeling off. It was disgusting. My memory was awful. I was so irritable. I was just miserable. I was a bitter human. Mm-hmm. My patience wasn't where it should be. At least for me, like where it typically is, I shouldn't word that as, and it should be. Just for me, it wasn't where it typically was. It was different from my norm. I was having severe joint pain. I was having migraines, and um, I knew it was coming. And I was like, I knew in my head, it was like, okay, I've got to do something to manage this stress because I know where this is heading. It's not heading anywhere good. I need to do something. And I remember going to my naturopath and being like, I need help because like, I don't know what to do. And like, I can't live like this. This isn't a way to live. And it was like, okay, well, you need to like make some changes. What are changes that you can make? And at that time, I told myself, there's nothing. What is causing me stress, I can't change. And I had convinced myself that that was the case. What I know now is different, but at that time, that's what I thought. And so I didn't change anything. It was like, okay, well, we'll take some supplements that'll hopefully help your body a little bit. And they didn't. Right. But ultimately, it all came crumbling down when I was ultimately physically assaulted at work by a student. Okay. I wound up in a situation where I got trapped against a door and kicked multiple times in the abdomen before my colleagues could come and remove that child off of me so that I could get up and get out of the way. And ultimately, wasn't that child's fault. That child wound up in a trauma response due to a situation that they had been dealing with, and I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Wound up getting out of that situation, going to take some time, bawling, went home, didn't feel good, but went home, went to bed, got up the next morning, went to work because we are so short-staffed. I was like, I can't take a sick day. My colleagues need me. The kids that I work with need me. I need to go to work. I have a big important meeting that day. I can't not be there. And so even though I had something that was really traumatic happen to me, I figured I needed to go. So I walked into work that day. And as soon as I got into the building, I started sweating profusely. My body was telling me, no, this isn't good. And was in my office, and I had two colleagues who, out of their, I guess, respect for me, came in and closed the door and said, what the heck are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. You need to go home. Have you even been to a doctor? Like, what are you thinking? And it was like, okay, but I can't. I need to be here. You guys are short. I'm supposed to be covering. Like, I can't not be here. It's not fair. And they were like, no, like, you need to go home. You need to go to a doctor. You need to get checked out. You need to take some time. And I remember at that point I broke and I just started bawling. And all I could think about in my head was, I'm a failure. I suck at my job. I'm letting everybody down. My administrator is going to think I suck at my job, that I'm incapable. Everybody's going to think I'm a crazy person now because I'm sitting in my office bawling, essentially having a mental breakdown. Was what was going through my head about how horrible of a person I was, how I was letting everybody down, and I was a failure. And I convinced myself that what happened to me was my fault. But ultimately, they called my husband and they sent me home. Mm-hmm. And that, at that time, caused even more upset. Right. And more embarrassment and humiliation, and continued that negative thought spiral in my head. But I went to the doctor, couldn't even articulate once I got to the hospital what was wrong with me. I just bawled. Finally got it out. They ran blood work and did some other tests and I think an x-ray. And it's like, your kidneys are bruised. You need to take some time and you need to heal. Was written off work for, ultimately, actually, I was supposed to be off until from October. This happened the end of October. I was supposed to be off until May, actually, was when I was supposed to be off until. had went for some counseling, and through that process, they came out with that I had clinically significant levels of trauma due to workplace stress. It wasn't even that incident. It was the stress of that job. And was what they came out with. And for a long time, once I got home, all I felt was anger and shame and embarrassment. And I couldn't do anything. I couldn't get anything done. I didn't even have the capacity to Google stuff. It was like, hey, Mariah, I don't think we want to teach anymore. But I didn't even have the capacity to look up anything else. And it was awful. It was really awful. And so in that moment too, I was sitting there and it was like, how do I show up as a mom? How do I show up for my family? How do I show up for my friends when I am as broken as I've ever been right now? And how do I show up for them when I can't even show up for myself? Was essentially what was going on in my head. That was essentially what started this whole like holy man moment, I guess, for me with my experience with burnout, and having to really sit there and think, okay, what could I have done differently? Because ultimately I had said that there wasn't anything, and that was a lie. Because if I would have, and that's I think what I've learned the most, is that yes, I was doing all those things and it didn't work. It didn't work because the thing that was causing the stress, the thing that was causing the burnout, I refused to deal with.
Right.
I refused to set boundaries. I refused to say no. I refused to be firmer in asking for help and support. And so ultimately, all of those things contributed to why that burnout happened. Because ultimately, I can't control everything. I couldn't have controlled that situation that ultimately kind of caused everything to go kaboom. But some of those things, like advocating for myself, like setting boundaries, those things I could control, and I didn't.
Right.
I didn't have those conversations. So, yeah.
Before the incident, were there sprinklings, whispers of you should speak up for yourself, or you don't have to say yes, or I'd really like to say no to this, but I said yes, even if it was just like a glimmer of a moment? Or
yes, there
were those beliefs like so automatic that it didn't even occur to you, that you could advocate or say no, or,
It depended on the situation. If it was something, and it depended on the narrative, like if it was something tied to that I believed that doing that particular thing was going to be what made me a good mom or a good teacher, if that was what I was attributing it to, then I struggled. There were instances where I tried to be like, I need help. Like, I can't keep doing this. I need help. And I did say that, but it just kind of got brushed off.
Right.
And in those moments, instead of being firm and being like, no, you're not understanding.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to do this anymore. Or no, you're not understanding. I will do this, but I will not do that. I just sucked it up and kept going.
After the incident and the time off and the counseling and the personal development work, how did you go from, I don't even know my resources or my choices or that I could use my voice in this moment, to giving the examples that you just said? Like, how do you go from here to here?
It was a lot of time thinking, which also sometimes made me really angry, because when you're home by yourself, you spend a lot of time in your own head.
Right.
And sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's not. But I had to start to really think about, what are my values? Are my choices aligning with my values? Are some of the decisions I made for work, did they align with my core values? No. And so it was a case of, okay, so if that's the case, then what can we do instead?
Right.
And constantly coming back to and referencing, does this align with my values? Yes. Okay, cool. Then we're good with that. Or if no, then there's a boundary or a conversation that needs to happen there. Something else was kind of reconciling and battling within myself of this idea that I had of how I thought people should see me.
Mm.
And I was holding on to this idea that I needed to present as having it all together. And I don't need to ask for help because I don't want to think that anybody thinks that I can't do it. And that stems back from being a single mom. And I don't even remember, I think I was reading a parenting book and it cited how children of single parents had worse outcomes. And I remember feeling so ticked off and being like, this is BS. Mm-hmm. And my child is not going to suffer because he has a single mom. And I'm going to work my butt off to prove that he is not going to be any less or have any worse outcomes than a child from a 2-parent household. And so I was holding on to that idea that no, I need to do it all because I'm not going to have that for him. I am not going to be a statistic. My child is not going to be a statistic. No way. And I had to reconcile with, okay, asking for help does not make you weak. Mm-hmm. Asking for help is what you ultimately need to be healthy. Asking for help is how you are going to be able to be a mom that shows up for her kids so that they can continue to actually have a mom who is here. Yeah. Because if we keep going this way, they might not have a mom who's here. Mm-hmm. And so I had to get to a point where it was like I needed to ask my mom for help. And I live an hour and a half away from my parents, and my parents are separated. I live in a small town community that I'm not from. So I don't actually have a lot of support where I live. Mm-hmm. And so for some people, that's something where they can reach out to family, they can reach out to siblings, they maybe have a really close circle of friends. And I have a beautiful circle of friends, but they're not necessarily where I live. Mm-hmm. And so it was looking at, okay, which ways can I access support? Which ways can I have some help? And sometimes it meant that my parents came out. My parents were willing, and I said to them, I'm really struggling and I need some help. And so they were willing to come out and support me. I had to have a conversation with my brother and my sister-in-law, and it was like, hey, I'm really having a hard time. Can I come and spend a couple days with you so that I can get a little bit of a change of scenery? And it was like, yeah, no problem. And it was a case of having to have a conversation with my husband and being like, I'm really struggling. I am on stress leave for a reason. I do not have the capacity to do X, Y, Z, and I need you to step up. And some of those conversations were really hard. And sometimes there were people who were not able to step up when I needed them to step up, which I am sure for many people is also the case, that sometimes the people that you count on, you can't necessarily count on. And so in those moments too, it was a case of, okay, so now what? And in those moments, I had to let some things go, where it was a case of maybe we're not going to make it to Taekwondo tonight because I just can't do it. Mm-hmm. Maybe we're going to have chicken fingers and fries tonight because that is all that I can bring myself to make for supper. Maybe I don't even have the capacity to do that, and so we're going to order pizza. And just recognizing that in those moments, those things don't make me a bad mom. Mm-hmm. And just trying to remind myself of that and keep coming back to those pieces Because I found that internal dialogue too is so dangerous. If you don't start to catch it and become more aware, you'll beat yourself down so much.
The aspects and the strategies that you named were, one, having the conversation, and not only in having the conversation, you've done the internal work of, what do I need? What am I asking for? Who do I ask? If they say no, who else do I ask? How else can I phrase it? How else can I say it? How do I command now that this is what I need? And I want to make the distinction between commanding and demanding. I think even in today's society, assertive communication can sound aggressive, especially coming from a female voice. And so, having the audacity to command that is all included in that hard conversation. And the other things I heard you name were, having the vulnerability to say to people, I'm not okay, and I need you to step up, and continuing to have that check-in with yourself around, what does this feel like in my body? Does this align with my values? Is this a whole body yes? Is this a whole body no? And something that I'm curious about, and in what you said, was I used to believe that I didn't have a choice, or that it just had to be a certain way. I think that's a very widely held belief, especially among women who are programmed to be the caregivers, to be the doers, to be the people who do all of the things all of the time. Can you give a little bit of insight of how you reframed, that I'm a good mother if I'm this way, means this, if I do this, I'm a bad mother, and how you found your advocacy or your choice in all of that?
Part of it was coming back to that and reminding myself, and it's something that I actually say to myself quite a bit, is exactly the same statement that you said, that belief that every person is doing the best that they can in that moment with the tools that they have. And if the best that I can do in that moment is, like I said, the chicken fingers, then am I providing food? Yes. Am I, and that's maybe not the best example, but I think part of it too is that I know that I love my children. And I know that without a doubt. And I know that everybody has a hard day. Everybody has a hard time. We all have hard seasons, and those hard seasons do not define who we are at our core. And I think just knowing that at my core, I am a good person, I am a good mom. And that's kind of what I held on to. And then realizing, like, and part of this came from the anger actually, too, where it was like, okay, if I would have had help, I might not have gotten to this point. If I would have advocated for myself, I might not have gotten to this point. And it was almost like that unfortunate reality check of the, okay, so this happened. What did we learn? Because we need to learn something from this, because I sure as heck don't want to go through it again to relearn the lesson.
Yeah.
But I come back to a lot too, to what would I want for my child? Would I want this for my child? Would I expect that this would be what was happening to my child right now? What would I want for them? What would I say to them? And that's how I try and flip the dialogue within my own head too, is it's like, okay, hold on. Would I say this to my 11-year-old?
Right.
Would I say this to my 8-year-old or my 3-year-old? No. Would I say it to my best friend when they are feeling like worthless? No. So why would I say it to myself? And those were all pieces. And I don't, I don't know. I think it was I just got to a point, and that's not really helpful, but I think for me at least, I just got to a point where I was like, enough is enough.
Right.
I have spent how many years of my life being a people pleaser and living my life to fit this box.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to do it anymore because look at where it's gotten me. But once you actually get clear on what is a value, what are my values,
Mm-hmm.
then you can start to really get clear on, okay, can I align my decisions with
Mm-hmm.
those? Because if they're what's important to me, can I align the person I want to be with those things?
Mm-hmm.
Can I show up in this world as a mom, as a woman, as just a person in general in alignment with those things?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that that's important too. Because if you don't know, well, it's almost like you're kind of flying blind a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Doing work on authenticity and values and shame resilience is some of the simplest and most profound kind of work, because when a person surrenders to the process, the hard process of figuring out who they are, what they stand for, what beliefs they're going to hold and emulate through their life, things like burnout and guilt and rage and low frustration tolerance and even confidences can make a big difference in the motherhood journey.
Yeah. Well, I think too, asking yourself, am I doing this because I saw a bunch of pictures on Instagram of everybody throwing these opulent birthday parties with the balloon things? Or am I doing this because it brings me joy? Am
Yes.
I doing this because it's important to my child? Like, which one is it?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of telling for you too. Because it shouldn't be about if it's Pinterest worthy. It should
Mm-hmm.
be because it brings you joy or it's important to you or it aligns with that sense of value in some way. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's this pressure we're putting on ourselves to do so many of these things, and when we actually sit back and just because that's what's done
Mm-hmm.
or that's what we see, but when we actually sit back and it's like, why the heck am I doing this? I don't even want to do this. I don't even like this. I think this is dumb. It's like, oh, okay. So we're not helping ourselves in that instance either because we're not being true and authentic to ourselves and what we want to do. We're just going along with things for keeping up with the Joneses, I guess, or matching your social media feed.
The value, I think, of curiosity is really important to me. And when I ask myself questions, or when I even question things maybe in my relationship or the status quo, that curiosity comes in of like, why do we do treat bags? Why do I have to do a certain thing to be a good mom? Why does my kid have to be in 5 activities? What does that prove for me? Or what am I trying to do? And so that's my personal experience. But I've also walked to many clients through this process of, getting curious about where some of those messages come from. And I think, coming full circle in this particular conversation, around the curiosities that you had around, is this in alignment with me anymore? How can I advocate for my needs? Now I've had this experience. How am I going to move through it? How am I going to respond to it? What do I need? What do the people around me need? And I just want to acknowledge that the things that we have talked about and the strategies, there is work and mental load involved in that. And if you are at a place where you cannot get going, if you cannot get moving in the direction that you'd like to move into, to reach out. And
Okay, I find too sometimes with personal growth, I find that gets really heavy too. where you read and read and read and read, or you take a course and you take a course and you take a course and you're looking at stuff and you're looking at stuff. And then it gets to a point where I feel like even that gets so dark and so heavy.
You're almost burnt out from the development.
Just keep going. Just keep going. You got more to dig through here. And it's like, I feel sometimes like there's this pressure that you have to keep doing it all the time.
Yeah.
And that can burn you out too, because that's hard. It's hard, uncomfortable, intense work.
Yeah.
And you got to come up for air every once in a while there too. But yeah, some of that too, I found like sometimes it's not helpful. Sometimes we're not in a place to do that. And that's okay too.
Yeah.
So,
the answer to burnout is actually to do less, not to do more. Like in the most simplest way, if somebody was to just take one sentence away from today, it's that if you are feeling burnout, you have to do less. Okay, thank you so much for having this conversation with me and being vulnerable and sharing those hard parts of your story.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us today on the Chill Like a Mother podcast. If you had an aha moment or found yourself saying, oh yeah, me too, maybe share this podcast with somebody who might appreciate it, a friend, maybe in your mom group or on Facebook. Episodes come out every Sunday to help you with those Sunday scaries. And subscribe so that you never miss an episode and you can carry me, Kayla, around in your back pocket. If you liked this episode, please leave us a rating or a review. I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to look at it behind the scenes and get exclusive ways to be more chill as a mom, follow me on Instagram at chill.likeamother. All of the mentionables are linked in the show notes, and always, this is not a replacement for professional advice, though we are professionals. We're not your professional, though we do encourage you to seek whatever professional supports you may need in your life. And in case you haven't heard it today, you deserve the time and the money that it might take for you to take care of yourself in whatever way you need taken care of. Have a relatively chill day and catch you in the next episode.